The newspaper did a whole project looking at race. The executive editor at the time, Eileen Brown, decided to take 1 year to look at race and its impact on Northwest Indiana, looking at all of the institutions, schools, police, politics, transportation, all of those elements. Me being kind of, basic smart alecky reporter, said, well, I want to look at the role that the Post-Tribune played, the role of the newspaper. Not really understanding just where that was going to go, but figuring that if we're going to talk about anything, we should start with talking about us. So I had to go back through actual newspaper archives and databases and LexisNexis searches, and I would count up things like how many times Richard Hatcher was mentioned in the paper. And it was like, since he had left office, it was still well over 2,000, approaching 3,000 mentions. It would seem like it was a real fascination. And we had this little, it's like primitive Twitter, basically. It was a column called Quickly, where people could call into to the newspaper, or they could write to the newspaper. People were really just starting to email even at that point. And they would have their little comments. This was based on a project that they had in Atlanta, and usually people would complain about the Falcons or stuff like it was all like traffic's bad here. But more often than not, in Northwest Indiana, people would just mention race in those comments, and would say race, racism, racial, and you could just count up all of those, and it just happened all the time. And there was one incident in particular where Richard Gordon Hatcher was mentioned. He was trying to get some money for his Civil Rights Hall of Fame. And there were a number of comments in Quickly on this. Most of them were negative. Shouldn't give him, don't do this, whatever. But a handful of them were positive, supporting him or just supporting the project or the mayor himself, the former mayor. And the way it worked is that those comments that were negative, they ran in all editions of the Post-Tribune, the ones that were in Porter County and Lake County and the suburbs, as well as the city. And they were only a handful, but the handful that were positive and praised the mayor, those were only run in Gary. The Post-Tribune would write articles about how such and such teacher who had taught in Gary at Frable for 20 years was leaving Gary to go to wherever. And it's like, he's just thinking like, why are we writing stories about people leaving the town? How is that helping anything? They were creating their own narrative. Everybody's leaving. It's almost like, and are you next? When are you going to leave now? Well, what about you? Where's your house in Maryville or your house there in the suburbs? And that it actually helped create a drumbeat that helped empty out the city. Their own coverage began to contribute to what was going on in Gary.